All right. Good evening, everybody. Let me see with one hand side. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Well, hey, everybody. It is great to see everybody. My name is Mike Wakeford. I'm Executive Director of Muse Winston-Salem, the Museum of Understanding, Storytelling, and Engagement. And it is my honor to welcome you to what I know is going to be a terrific event tonight, from Combo Corner to the World, the Diaspora of the Winston-Salem Sound. On behalf of Muse Winston-Salem, I want to thank our guests tonight, our collaborators at the Ramcat and Bookmarks, and each of you for sharing part of your evening with us. I'm especially excited, I'm just going to go ahead and say it, an old friend, the inaugural executive director of Muse Winston-Salem, formerly known as New Winston Museum. Kitty White is in from Oakland. I see you, Kitty. Thanks for being here. It is now.
Thank you so much to you and Mike and Muse for putting on the program tonight and allowing us to come on board and partner with you. We're a big, proud supporter of the local Winston-Salem music scene. Really excited for this program. Dating back to Richard's time at the Garage, my first job in the music business as a freshman at Wake Forest, going over to hang flyers at Jay Stevens' old spot at Ziggy's. This program's incredible, and it's going to highlight some significant and influential eras of Winston-Salem music history. We reopened the Ramcat, a week and a half ago, April 16th, under restricted capacity and socially distant. We're at about 128 people in the big room, which is about 13%, 14% of our official capacity, and about 40% in Gas Hill. But we've had a tremendous response to being reopened. Can't thank everybody enough for coming and showing up, buying tickets, supporting the bands that have been playing. We got a full calendar of local and regional folks who are playing in the next couple of weeks, and then some really exciting stuff coming along later on this year, toward the latter end of the summer and the fall. Hope you can come out and support the Ramcat, and if not, totally understandable, but please do check out our virtual concert series, Home Sweet Home, live at the Ramcat. We recorded we're about to record our 50th episode next week with notable Winston-Salem musicians, regional musicians. That can be found on our Facebook and YouTube pages. So please do check it out. It's all free, some amazing performances there. And you are in great hands tonight with Messrs. Chris Stamey, Peter Holsapple, and the Dean of North Carolina Rock Criticism, David Menconi. I'm so excited for this. It's going to be an awesome night, and can't thank everybody enough for joining in and hearing these stories, because they're incredibly important to me. And they should be incredibly important to you. And so thank you so much to Muse and Alana and Mike for allowing us to partner with you on this.
Thank you, Andy. And I just want to say, everyone really do check out those videos that the Ramcat has been doing. Those are awesome. You guys have done such a good job with those. And Mike, I'll give it back to you now.
Ooh, I don't know where I don't know what part of my sentence I got cut off in. That's the first time I've actually gone completely gonzo in the middle of a Zoom program, actually. So anyway, sorry about that, but I was really pleased to see everybody's faces when I was able to get back on. Thanks again, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Kate Storhoff, who will be moderating this event tonight. Kate is a musicologist studying American music, primarily the culture of bands and wind ensembles. She teaches as adjunct faculty at Wake Forest University and the University of North Carolina School of the Arts, and works full-time as the retail manager at Bookmarks, another one of our partners this evening. Previously, Kate taught as a visiting assistant prof of music at Wake Forest University in 2018-19. So, Kate, thanks so much for being here, and the stage is yours.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here tonight with David, Chris, and Peter. Before I introduce the three of them, I wanted to let everyone know that we will have a Q&A at the end of this session. So if you think of any questions that you're dying to ask any of them while we're having our conversation, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and they will feed those through to me so I can ask them when we get to our Q&A section. So that way you don't have to try to remember your question if you think of it in 10 minutes and you don't have to hold it to the end. So keep those questions coming and we will get to those at the end of the show. So now I am honored to introduce David, Chris, and Peter. I'm going to read their bios and I would like to ask each of them a question, which is, what does North Carolina sound like to you? So y'all can answer this question in any way you would like. And now I would love to introduce you. David Menconi is the author of Step It Up and Go, the story of North Carolina popular music from Blind Boy Fuller and Doc Watson to Nina Simone and Superchunk. A journalist and author based in Raleigh, North Carolina, he spent 34 years writing for daily newspapers, 28 of them at the Raleigh News and Observer. He has also written for Rolling Stone, Billboard, Spin, New York Times, and served as North Carolina's Piedmont Laureate for 2019. His other books include Ryan Adams' Losering, A Story of Whiskeytown, Comin Right at Ya, How a Jewish Yankee Hippie Went Country, or The Often Outrageous History of Asleep at the Wheel, co-written with Ray Benson. His next book will be a history of the folk label Rounder Records, to be published in 2022 by University of North Carolina Press. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much.
Chris Stamey was raised in Winston-Salem and began playing music as a child. He is a multi-instrumentalist and played in several bands in high school with his friends Peter Holsapple and Mitch Easter. Stamey studied music at UNC Chapel Hill and formed the band Sneakers, which self-released a single in 1976 that was hugely influential in the indie pop genre and beyond. Stamey relocated to New York to play with Alex Chilton, and he went on to form the DBs in 1978 with Peter Holsapple and other North Carolina members. He has since performed all over the world, both as a solo musician and with Yola Tango, Matthew Sweet, and others. As a producer, arranger, and mixer, he has worked with over 100 artists, including Ryan Adams, Alejandro Escovedo, Tiff Merritt, Le Tigre, and Yola Tango. Welcome, Chris.
Great to be here.
And finally, Peter Holsapple. Peter was also raised in Winston-Salem, started playing guitar as a kid, and joined Stamey's DBs in 1978. Holsapple has been an active songwriter and musician for 5 decades and has toured and recorded with artists like REM, Hootie and the Blowfish, Indigo Girls, John Hyatt, the Trogs, and the Cowsills. His own bands, the DBs and Continental Drifters, are acknowledged as classic and influential groups. Welcome, Peter.
Nice to be here.
And if we could go, David, Chris, and Peter, if y'all could each speak about what North Carolina sounds like to you to get us started tonight.
All right, well, I believe I'm supposed to go first. And, you know, a Winston-Salem Sound, it's always been such a sprawling, varied collection of different sounds that I never think of it as one particular thing. There's also the blues that came up in the 20s and 30s. Before he landed in Durham, Blind Boy Fuller was busking around the tobacco warehouses in Winston. And then in the 50s, you had the Five Royales, one of the great early R&B bands, dedicated to the one I love before it was the hit for Mamas and Papas and was a butter commercial later, was a Five Royales hit back in the 50s. And I think it would be appropriate for me to read a little bit from the Winston-Salem chapter in the book that kind of sets the scene for a lot of what we'll be talking about tonight. This is the second section of chapter 9, which is called Combo Corner. The first section of that chapter is a wickedly self-indulgent recounting of the first time I ever heard REM, co-produced by Mitch Easter and Don Dixon from Winston. And yeah, then it goes into this. And this won't take long, I promise, and then we'll get to some actual conversation. In the years before the interstate highway system's I-40 brought the rest of America within easy reach in 1958, Winston-Salem was an off-the-beaten-path town. Church-going has always been a major recreational pastime there, going back to Salem's 18th century roots as a Moravian settlement and continuing into the present day. With more than 54% of the population claiming a church affiliation, according to bestplaces.net, Winston is reputed to be North Carolina's, quote, most religious city, unquote. Not that it's entirely sin-free, of course. Winston was an even bigger tobacco town than Durham in the early 20th century, and the place where Blind Boy Fuller began his warehouse busking career in the 1920s before landing in the Bull City. Along with cigarettes and the Five Royales, some of Winston's better-known exports include the poet Maya Angelou, country singer George Hamilton IV, basketball legend Earl the Pearl Monroe, who started at Winston-Salem State before winning an NBA title with the New York Knicks, and NASCAR driver Richard Childress. Even in isolation as a place where you had to make your own fun, however, Winston-Salem was never an uncultured backwater. It's always been a very diverse town where, quote, millionaires and mill rats live side by side, unquote, as native son Ben Folds put it in his group Ben Folds 5's 1994 single, Jackson Cannery. Between the presence of North Carolina School of the Arts and philanthropy from those millionaires, Winston was always artier than most municipalities of comparable size. During the 1960s, Winston's musician population included an unusually sophisticated young generation of students on the track from Brunson Elementary to Wiley Junior High to R.J. Reynolds High School. One of the main hangout spots for the big kids was Combo Corner, right by the front door of Reynolds High School, where aspiring teenage musicians would gather to bum smokes, compare notes, make connections, and form bands. But where their peers farther east were forming beach bands, the Winston kids' bands were more likely to bear the influence of progressive rock, psychedelia, and the 60s British invasion wave led by the Beatles. Mostly that came down to what they heard in the air. The radio good guy DJs at WAIR and WTOB would play a lot of Beatles, but also everything else, musician Peter Holsapple told me in 2017. There were always bands in Winston-Salem, a rich scene long before any of us started doing anything. Combos like the Teen Beats, the Five Satans. I remember being a kid in about 1965 and going to Saturday morning kiddie shows of local bands doing Yardbird covers, followed by a movie. Before long, we started thinking we could be up there on that stage doing it ourselves. Similar ideas had been buzzing around adolescent minds all over America since February 1964, when Beatlemania erupted after John, Paul, George, and Ringo played the Ed Sullivan Show with hordes of screaming girls looking on. Overnight, being in a band became just about the coolest thing to aspire to. Popular stylistic touchstones included The Move, The Kinks, MC5, even The Monkees, the mid-60s Screen Gems NBC comedy series starring the band of the same name. When the Monkees themselves played at Winston's Memorial Coliseum in December 1966, 12-year-old Mitch Easter was there. It was the first rock show I ever went to, Easter told me in 2017. And after I got home, my parents were watching the news when the band showed up in the studio, crashed the news, and did the weather. It was amazing they had the energy and wherewithal to do that. And it goes on, but that's a good stopping point, I think.
Thank you so much, David. I have to say, this book is just a delight to read. I can't recommend it enough to everyone who might not have had a chance to read it yet. And then Chris and Peter, I'd love to hear just what North Carolina sounds like to you. What does it mean to you?
Shall I go first, Chris? Okay. I mean, for me, it's the sound of coming home, I think. We had to leave North Carolina in 77, 78 and go to New York and sort of peddle our wares there because it was really hard to get a gig in North Carolina playing original stuff. I mean, all the stuff David was talking about is true. We listened to a lot of sort of prog rock stuff, but then we started writing our own songs, and it was an uphill battle in town. So we went to Chapel Hill. Back to North Carolina, and I felt like when I came back, I was accepted by town and all over the state that still played music and was welcomed with open arms. And so that's, that's what it is to me.
Thank you, Peter. And Chris?
Take it, Chris.
Well, when I think of the sound of North Carolina, I think of the rivers and the wind and the trees and, walking by a lake and hearing all the birds. And so this makes me think that, in a way, bluegrass is really at the heart of what I think of state sound. But I think that one thing there are two things about bluegrass that I love and that are also common to a lot of the music I like. It's one that there's a freedom to it and also a lack of guile. It's an honest expression, you know, the kind that used to be in Nashville up to a certain point before the big money arrived and everything got drum machines and more calculated. And that same sound of a sparkling brook in the mountains makes me think of John Coltrane, of Thelonious Monk, just figuring out if he puts his fingers right there on a piano. So we've mostly made rock music and folk music, Peter and I together. But the sound of North Carolina, to me, is a direct freedom of expression that you don't find in a big city where your mind is so cluttered. And I love being back here. I write music much more. My creative juices flow in North Carolina.
Thank you, Chris. That was a
You're
great
welcome.
answer. So as we're going to dive deep into this topic now, David, I hope that you could kick us off and talk about, as someone who didn't grow up in Winston-Salem, tell us about your understanding of the combo corner scene in the late 1960s and early 1970s.
Well, when I came here, and I grew up in Texas and Colorado, and I had never lived east of Interstate 35 before coming to North Carolina. So I knew the DBs and Let's Active. That was some of the few, those were two of the few North Carolina acts I knew about before. And, you know, I knew there was this whole thing in Winston-Salem. And as I came to learn, you know, as I wrote there, it was far more far-flung than I would have guessed. You know, the spirit of the age back then in the 1980s, when these bands were getting record deals, was you know, guitar pop of a certain sort, because that's what caught on. But it was really just a whole lot more multifaceted, and I would never have guessed about like the prog rock influence until, you know, things like interviewing Peter and Chris and Mitch about those days. So yeah, it was quite an ecosystem. I would love to see a book done. You know, it was basically a chapter in my book, but it would be a fascinating full-length book to do a deep dive on, and I would love to see that done, and hope to help make that happen with somebody. Well, of course, yes. Chris's book is pretty good simulation of that, but you know, another even bigger one than that I envision. So.
Chris and Peter, what was it like to be part of the combo corner scene?
I'm going to suggest that you pick one of the two. Otherwise, we'll talk over each other.
Take it, Chris. You take it.
Oh, me. Oh, I didn't mean that. What was it like to be? Well, I think Kurt Vonnegut had a notion of it was a karass. I'm not sure how you'd say it, but a group of people that weave into your lives and never leave. And that was kind of the experience of Combo Corner. There were just a few of us, and it might be a number like 30. And am I still here? I guess I am. Something just went bluey. It might be a number on the order of 30 people, maybe 40 people all in. But we played in all different combinations. There was a new band every 2 weeks. And the other thing that really, you know, it's a petri dish paradigm. You know, you need places to play, and you need a lot of teenage boredom helps a lot, and something to latch onto where you can then go without the coffee house scenes, without the churches giving us stages to go on where we didn't have to be at drinking age, and we didn't have to play the hits of the day. None of this would have happened. But the Petri dish thing also requires a few people to step up. And we did have Don Dixon, Mike Greer, Ted Lyons, and Mitch Easter, who, and lots of folks, but people who were saying, we can work hard at this and we can, it's fascinating. And how can we get better? How can we evolve? It was something that you found in the 60s, where the goal was not to sell as many as your last record or to find merchandising. There was no money, but the goal was to, how can the music go further? And that was an exciting concept that really came from just a few people. Sam Moss definitely has to be on that list.
I agree with what Chris said. And we did have a number of places that we could play, but it was hard to eke out any sort of earning with it, and because you had to really learn the hits of the day. Chris and I had a band called Rittenhouse Square that we had worked up a list of sort of aesthetically pleasing, at least to us, songs like Mott the Hoople and Flamin' Groovies, and 3 songs off of Shazam by The Move, which was just great. But our audience didn't necessarily know that stuff. I think we felt like we wanted to bring something to the audience that would make them say, oh, what is that record? What is that song? Is that one of yours? It's who is it by? And then we started bringing our own songs. So that was a kind of an entree to that. The other good thing about that was by the time we ended up in New York, we probably played a lot better than a lot of the DIY people that were starting their careers in '78 in New York. So that gave us a kind of a leg up. I blame it on Combo Corner, yeah.
Can y'all tell us about some of the venues you played at during this time? Are any of them still here in Winston-Salem today?
They're extant. The buildings are there, but I don't think they've been used in that form. The first thing that I remember is going to kiddie shows, and those were at the Carolina Theater, which is the Stevens Center, and a place called the Winston Theater, which is no longer. And you would go see a band, and you'd see a movie, and you'd play bingo, and you'd win a 6-pack of 16-ounce Cokes if you were lucky.
And this would be at noon, right?
Yes, or 9 o'clock in the morning. Mom and Dad would drop you off so that they could go to Sears or whatever they were going to do. And it was always amazing, the bands. I personally could not make the connection between what I was seeing on stage at the kiddie show and what the Beatles were doing on Ed Sullivan. So there were those things early on. And then there were recreation centers, which are still in Winston-Salem, Miller Park, Gymnasium, which I think probably still has some notes floating around in the ceiling from one of our shows in the 70s. Polo Park, Recreation Center. The churches that I really remember are Ardmore Methodist Church, Highland Presbyterian Church, the youth hall there that you used to have to go out the exit of Ed McKay's old location. You drove by that. Jim Kirkman booked that place and did great stuff. And then Knollwood Baptist Church, which was kitty-cornered from my house. But those are the main things for playing, as I recall. You remember anybody else, any other places, Chris?
I mean, Knollwood Church was a big one. I mean, folks went there, but they had a big stage. And I remember that was maybe the most fun venue at the time. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good list. I mean, the other venues were like all young rock and roll musicians. They were our friends' basements, and particularly the Nokomis Court basement. Mitch Easter was an only child, and his parents, I know his mom Lib called herself the oldest living teenager. And they were out there buying a new record by the Byrds and had a basement where it was a somewhat soundproof room. And then the Cadillac hearse was parked next to the room. And that was the band transportation vehicle. But a lot happened in that basement.
Can y'all talk about some of the mentors who influenced you as young musicians? You've mentioned Sam Moss, but we'd love to hear more about him and maybe about Bob Smith too. Can we start with?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Can I talk about Bob and you can talk about Sam here?
Sure. Okay.
Got it. Let it just point. No, I guess you can't point, can yeah, Bob Smith was a music teacher at at Reynolds, and he taught music theory at what I now know was a college level, but he was very clear. You know, he was an arranger rather than buy charts for Chicago or Blood, Sweat and Tears for the stage band. You know, he'd write them out, and he would, you know, I'd say, how do you modulate? He said, Chris, just get to that 5/7 chord of the next key, and you know, little things like that. When you're 10 years old and clueless, are just magic, you know. And so I'm so grateful to that. I know Mr. Shelton, who also taught Ben Folds, I believe, and Peter was also very influential. He was down at Wiley, I think. But those two guys I really remember. But that gift of learning music theory, which is like, you're not just driving the car, but you can make it, you know, that was something I'm grateful for this day. I think of him. I don't know what happened to him. I wish I did.
He also owned the one extant copy of Reptilian Disaster by Captain Speed, didn't he? Did he not?
No, there were 3 or 4 copies, I think.
Okay, but that was the legendary copy that everybody knew about.
And there was one in the Reynolds library. I shouldn't say that because it may still be there. Since that record is probably worth $78,000 right now, it will probably be stolen tomorrow.
So Sam Moss was a friend of ours and a mentor. He was a mentor. He was an idol first for me. You know, I got to see this guy playing guitar in front of a horn band. I got to Sam late. Sam had already been playing with Mitch years before that, and everybody knew him, and I knew of him, but I finally saw his band, The Rhythm Method, and it was awesome. They were like our version of Mike Bloomfield's Electric Flag, and he never ceased to amaze. He had a band called Sweet Rye. It was a little 4-piece band, guitar, bass, drums, and lead vocals, and he covered it. He could play everything from Paul Kossoff from Free to the best Keith Richard you ever heard. And all the while, just this really native, intelligent guy. And he had a guitar store on 4th Street in Winston-Salem for many years that ended up being a hangout for people coming through town and people in town. And he was just, we were very lucky to have had Sam as long as we did. That's all I can say. We miss him dearly. He was, hold on. Chris has got a.
No, that's for them. Sorry. Yes, once you're done.
Okay, I'm done.
I was about to get all sentimental.
I was getting too sentimental. Go ahead.
Yeah, Sam, you know, he taught me to drink tequila out of the back of a old Thunderbird and enjoy W.C. Fields, and we loved him to death. And this is a story you'll hear a lot. And I'm so happy that a couple of months ago, I was looking for an old tape and an old recording. And at the end of the reel, we found several unreleased songs by Sam that he'd recorded, singing, playing all the parts except Mitch played drums. He came to Chapel Hill and recorded with Mitch and then just put it on the shelf. And then once we knew those were around, we found the rest of a whole album, which is a fantastic record. And can you tell I'm excited about this? There's going to be a Sam Moss record in the near future. We're mixing it and trying to figure out some funding for it and a label. But there's never been anything recorded by Sam. Last night, after a little bit of television, I went to YouTube and I put up one track by Sam. It's a song called Rooster Blood, which is probably going to be the first song on the record. So if you want to search on YouTube for about 48 hours, you can hear Rooster Blood by Sam, and then it's going away until the record comes out.
Why don't we listen to just a little bit? I'll play it.
Oh,
I'll play a snippet real quick.
Technology.
talking to. Never let me down, keep me up when I feel blue. I know there's nothing finer, no one better in this land. Sure I've got the Midas touch, but loving on a man, keep that lead in my pencils. Good loving ease my ache and pain. Gotta keep that old rooster blood just doing furnace on my brain. Yeah.
Nice.
Hey, before we move on, could I chime in here with a little bit about Sam Moss? I've got a nice little thing Mitch said about him in the book. This won't take long, I promise. 2 years older and infinitely wiser, Sam Moss was, in Holsapple's estimation, the finest guitar player ever to walk the streets of Winston-Salem, Michael Bloomfield. Easter recalled being invited to jam with Moss for the first time as a turning point. I was 13 and he was 15, a big gap for that age, Easter said. But it was even bigger because he seemed like he was 35, with a demeanor like he'd already been on the Chitlin circuit. So seasoned and knowledgeable and just good. Right then I decided, that's it, this is my life. Moss would serve as inspirational mentor to generations of Winston musicians, including much of the Combo Corner crowd. But he never seemed to take himself as seriously as everyone else did. Easter recalled reacting with horror when Moss told him he saw music as little more than a hobby, protesting, "You can't say that, you're too good, you have to be famous." So anyway, it's great that there's going to be a record. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And Alana just put in the chat box that according to City Councilman Jeff McIntosh, Sam Moss was just elected to the Winston-Salem Walk of Fame, thanks to Andy Tennille.
Wow.
That's excellent.
So since we've mentioned Mitch Easter's name a few times, I thought we could pivot and talk about Mitch a bit. David, I wondered if you could start us off and talk a little bit about the influence Mitch Easter had on the Winston-Salem music scene.
Sorry, let me unmute myself there. Yeah, you know, he had a reputation that was such that we heard about him from afar. He was one of the first that I learned about even before I moved to North Carolina. And he was inspirational to a lot of people. I mean, still is, obviously he's still active, but here's another quote from the book. When I asked Ben Folds what growing up in North Carolina gave him he would not have had elsewhere, here was his answer. "A fierce sense of artistic independence," Folds told me in 2019. "A lot of the country grows up feeling like someone else has to take their art to validate it with that stamp of approval. But what I saw growing up was my heroes just taking things into their own hands, like Mitch Easter. Whether or not he was making it nationally, I had no way of knowing. I just saw him opening a studio, producing people, making records without asking for anyone's approval. I feel really lucky to have grown up in North Carolina seeing that." And that was, you know, what he was inspired by was him opening that studio in his parents' garage and making these incredibly acclaimed, amazing records that were, you know, heard worldwide. I've just, and of course, you know, as far as the music, I've just loved pretty much everything he's ever done to death. The next bad record I hear him have anything to do with will be the first. I don't think it's in him.
Chris or Peter, would you like to hop in and talk about what it was like to know Mitch too?
Well, I didn't meet Mitch until I was about 6. And but we were getting into trouble of sorts from that point on. But music was not really a big part of it. We were, I hate to think of it now, but we were, you know, we were cultivating salamanders and putting them up in little rockets, STs and Centauri pet rockets, and they would parachute down, but not always. Sometimes it wasn't a happy ending. We begged tiny motorcycles out of our parents, and there were many, you know, made. Once we discovered Spies and The Man from U.N.C. in particular, that was our bridge into recording, because The Man from U.N.C. would come on, and of course you want to relive it. It was so great. So there was no such thing as a video recorder, but you could get a reel-to-reel tape recorder. So we discovered recording our television programs. And then one day we put the reels on backward, and that was, wow, that's a different world entirely. We had a radio show that broadcast at least 4 houses down. And actually owning a guitar, Mitch was first with that, and quickly leapt into that. But it's funny, I think of the Rockets almost as much as the music. That was, I don't know if that was of interest, but to me it was.
I think it is. I think it's a foundation of a really great long friendship that you guys have had, and you know, being able to continue to work together all these years later is pretty great. I remember seeing Mitch across the tarmac at Wiley during lunch, and was trying to figure out how to approach him, because I believe he was already playing guitar. He had a Mosrite guitar and was playing not only in the junior high school stage band, but he also had some nighttime gig that I recall that he was playing. I don't know whether it was a hotel bar or something like that with older players.
Really?
I just remember hearing about that. And he had his 410 Super Reverb. And I knew all this stuff about Mitch Easter, right? He's a year older than me. But again, as he pointed out with Sam, the period of a year and 2 years was like mammoth at the time. So all I could think to talk to him about was, I asked him if he'd heard Kick Out the Jams by the MC5, which had just come out. Bingo. Immediate friendship.
She saw Mitchell's iPad. I'll answer this way. I don't know how to.
Hey, Mitch, we can hear you guys.
Oh, are you there?
I wouldn't change the angle.
I don't know how this works, but I saw a message for you that said, "Is this Mitch?" So we're trying to figure out what we're supposed
We
to.
wanted to say hi now that everyone's talking about you.
Oh yeah, hey Alana, this is cool. Keep going.
Okay.
I think I was done. I'm done talking about Mitch now that he's
Don't
here.
want to bust in on this. I have no comment on that guy.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, we had a song lined up that we thought we could play from yesterday's Tomorrow, Room with a View. Can we listen to a little bit of that?
Do you have the video of it? Do you have the video to
Sure,
play?
I can play the video.
Might as well, right?
Sorry? Yeah, that's fine. Let me grab my link.
And the record we're talking about is a live record from the Ramcat, recorded 2 years ago, that was just mixed and it's coming out in a week, I think. So this is something from the concert. Don't sweat it if you can't get it.
I got it. Here it comes.
Okay.
Competing parts and broken hearts. Oh no, start
Wow.
Chris, was that Don Dixon on trombone?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yankee from off trombone.
Had no idea he played. All right.
He's been playing a lot recently, I hear.
That was awesome. Such great energy. Really fun.
Oh, and Lynn Blakey was singing there. She was in a touring version of Let's Active, and she's well known in Greensboro as well as Winston.
And also Doug Davis from Winston-Salem,
Right.
who is Vagabond Saint Society, I believe, a regular fixture of the Ramcat, and continuing Winston-Salem music on into the 21st century.
And for the drummer for a lot of the concert was a woman named Robin Borthwick, who played with Mitch in a band called the Loyal Opposition when they were maybe 13, maybe younger. I'm not sure the age. And she's still playing great and really a fantastic musician.
Awesome. I wondered if we could pivot a bit now, and I'd love to know what it was like to make that move from Winston-Salem to New York City. Peter, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. I followed them. I sidetracked after Chapel Hill to Memphis for 3 months and recorded at Sam Phillips Studio and did some demos of some songs. And then I got a call from Will Rigby, drummer for the DBs and my best friend for many, many decades, and asked if I wanted to come and audition for the DBs because they were looking for somebody to play organ. So I came up and tried out, and presume I got the gig and stayed with the band. And it was interesting because I kind of knew I was going to end up in New York, just because my parents lived there and I was born in Connecticut, and sort of my brother lived in New York, and it just seemed like the place to go, since it was a little bit of a struggle. Well, I lie. It was a big struggle trying to get original material appreciated. I mean, Chris had done Sneakers in Chapel Hill, and after that, Mitch and I had the H-Bombs, and we were trying to do lots of original stuff, and it was just not. I mean, I don't know whether it's a reflection of the songs or the audience's ability to dig it, but it seemed to work in New York. And so, it was a good place to live when you were poor. In 1978, you could do that. And it was great. Chris, I followed you, so.
Well, I mean, that's a good answer. I don't know if we need, if we're talking about Winston, that's maybe enough. I mean, I could talk about New York all day, but maybe on a New York panel.
Well, thank you for that answer, Peter. I'd like to wrap it up with asking David to talk a little bit more about zooming out and thinking about North Carolina broadly. David, I really love the way that your book brings in your own experiences with the music of North Carolina into your narrative. And I wondered if you could speak about some of the main themes of the history of popular music in North Carolina. What do you see some of the guiding structures in how you told the history?
Well, I've always kind of thought of North Carolina as the day job state, which I don't mean in a pejorative way at all. There's a certain kind of populist working class mindset that musicians here seem to retain even after they go pro. Someone like Doc Watson, who, had he been sighted, probably would have just worked as a carpenter or something and picked a little guitar on the weekend. But he was a practical man, and there weren't many ways for a blind man to make a living. So he did it with music. But even so, he still kind of carried himself in this very modest, unassuming blue collar way. Virtuosos from here tend to, in my experience at least, tend to be people like Doc Watson or Earl Scruggs, who don't take themselves nearly as seriously as the rest of the world takes them. So there is this kind of underdog sense of populism to a lot of the artists here. That was kind of the through line of the book, the thread that I tried to pick up on and link all of this together. it's a state of doers more than dreamers. Plenty of dreams, of course, but the people here will put in the sweat equity to make it happen. And I tried to tie as many of those stories together as I could across genre and across time. And yeah, it covers about 100 years. And it includes jazz and blues and country and rock and everything in between. So, yeah.
I can add one. When I did move to New York, I was doing this and that, and I got a gig playing bass with Alex Chilton, who had been in Memphis with a band called Big Star, and it had a big hit with The Letter. And we were playing, and we had a hard time finding side musicians or to fill out the band in a way. And one day I said to him, you know, what is it? This is New York, but most people just are not very good or didn't know what the names of the frets were, you know. I mean, it was kind of shocking to me. And he said, listen, Chris, good things come from the provinces. Just like that. And I think that can be true. And I'll be thinking about that with all the nasty letters I get from the Bush Tetras and whatever, but I didn't mean it in a bad way. I meant there was a naivety to the musicians in New York that was very surprising.
Thank you, Chris. It says a lot about North Carolina and Winston-Salem. David, before we wrap it up, I would love if you could talk a little bit about the Five Royales, another really important group from Winston-Salem before the DBs came along. I wondered if you could speak a bit about them and their presence in Winston-Salem.
I would be delighted. They were a really amazing group. And I had never heard a thing about them until I got here. I'd been here maybe a year when they were winning a North Carolina Folk Heritage Award. And that gave me the opportunity and excuse to come over and interview them. And yeah, they started out as the Royal Sons Quintet, a gospel group. Their contract with Apollo Records was such that they could make secular as well as gospel. Their gospel records weren't selling, so with the label's encouragement, they went over to the secular side of the fence, and they kept it kind of blue too. They were masters of the double entendre, some legit dirty songs for the time. And they're kind of in the captain's chair was the guitarist and main songwriter Loman Pauling, who was an amazing songwriter. He just wrote some incredible classics. I mentioned Dedicated to the One I Love. Slumber the Slum was another just incredible song. I mean, it's like psychedelic rock years before there supposedly was such a thing. So they had a good long run through the 50s and into the 60s before kind of running out of gas. They never really crossed over and had big hits on the main pop charts. Most of their hits were R&B, but they certainly influenced a lot of people. Booker T and the MGs, Steve Cropper's guitar player, will admit he copped most of his licks from Loman Pauling. They did finally get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, it was years after they were all gone. So it was posthumously. And Winston is finally kind of acknowledging them. There's some historical markers and whatnot. There's a Five Royales Drive. It's only about a block long, but I went and knocked on some doors one day to see if anybody there had actually heard of the group, and only one person I found on that street was. So I hope they become better remembered, but they were incredible.
Thanks for that, David. I'll play a snippet of one of their songs, and then after that we can move on to Q&A. If anybody has questions for any of our awesome panelists, just put them in the chat bar and we'll pass those on to Kate and ask them after we. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Also, on this live record that's coming out, Don Dixon we do cover Think by the band.
Awesome. So all right, well, let's see which, let me pull this up real quick and I'll get one of these playing here.
Play one of the blue ones.
Don't try to figure out where I come from. Now don't try to figure out where I but I can do the stompity stomp. Do you hear? Stompity stomp. Oh yeah. Stompity stomp. I can do the stompity stomp. Oh, stompity stomp. I can do the stompity stomp. Oh, stompity stomp. I can do the stompity stomp. Oh yeah. Stompity stomp. I can do the stompity stomp. Stompity stomp. Stomp.
He sounds like he was. He sounds like he was listening to Hubert Sumlin there a little bit.
Great tone.
And he was basically working as a night watchman in Brooklyn when he died of a heart attack at age 47. Came to a sad premature end, but yeah, what a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've got several questions from the audience. We'll start with the first one, which is, how was the Winston sound and or scene influenced by the Athens, Georgia sound scene, or vice versa?
Vice versa. We were chronologically, if you're talking about a very narrow blinkered point of view, what we referred to as celebrating the Winston-Salem sound on this record was 68 to 73, 74. And that's just a myopic slice of it. But what people talk about the Athens scene, what came along a little later. I'm trying to think when Pylon was getting going, but I mean, we're thinking more like 1980 for that, 1979 maybe. So we were first, totally different, unrelated, no connection, but first.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on that question?
No, I think he's right though.
I alienated enough people for one.
I remember working with Murray Attaway, who was the lead guitar player and singer for Guadalcanal Diary, a band from Atlanta. And he told me that independent of knowing me, he had heard about bands from Winston-Salem when he was growing up in Atlanta. He's a little bit younger than us, but so apparently word got around. We had a couple of people ended up leaving Winston-Salem. There was a guy, Lee Goodness, who was the drummer for that band of Sam's called Sweet Rye, moved to Atlanta, and he still plays. So maybe a little bit came down with him.
I mean, records were a great virus, and you know, Peter Buck was down there, Danny Beard at the record store is down there. So I'm sure that some of these weird records that we made in North Carolina did filter down. I was thinking about about Kathleen Hanna yesterday because of a reissue I was working on. And I remember when she came in the control room and said, I found this amazing early proto-feminist band, I can't believe, and held up a single of the Cosmopolitans, who made their record at Drive-In. And I was dating the lead singer at one time, and the cover, it was My Cat. So that was a funny little loop-de-loop because, I mean, to jet from Drive-In up through the Seattle scene and Inspire Nirvana, you know, it's kind of an odd one. That make any sense, Peter?
Yes.
I'll rely on him to, okay, thank you.
Yes, did good. Very clear.
Just go like this if it's losing.
That sort of stuff. Well, I mean, you have to remember also that Chris got a fair amount of traction with the Sneakers record in 1976. So, you know, he was talking about the Cosmopolitans, the fact that that was a car record, right? On your label also?
No, I think, didn't Alan Betrock put it out?
Was that on Shake? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But, you know, you brought that to his attention. So Chris has worked sort of as a talent agent for getting people heard. I don't think I would ever have gotten as far in my career had I not hooked up with him long ago, and that he still works with me. Who knew?
We found a tape going through some of Sam Moss's things of, I knew Peter and it was great, and I knew that Sam Moss was great, and I wanted them to meet each other. So we did what was called a Hot Wheels session. And I don't know if my parents were out of town, but we took over the living room, had a brass section, and Peter sang some, and his friend from Exeter, Benmont Tinch, was in town. And so we had this big session. It was legendary in our minds. And then I found the tape a couple of weeks ago. So it did actually exist.
And tell them how the tape was.
It sounded like whoever recorded the thing was on Mars. I mean, and it must have been me. It was pretty bizarre.
Just to make sure you understand, it was called the Hot Wheels session because I believe Chris's brother had a Hot Wheels set of cars that we had set up that people were playing with variously for the afternoon as well.
Hey, since y'all mentioned the Cosmopolitans, here's their record.
Classic.
Indeed.
That is really cool. Anything that Kathleen Hanna says is awesome. I am totally down for.
Yeah, she made a lot of records here. We were just working on, the one we were working on is a reissue of Julie Ruin. And then I made 2 La Tigra records here when my studio was in the house. I'm talking, it's no longer. And it's funny, I keep thinking about, it's now my daughter's bedroom, and that's where La Tigra made their albums, and Ryan Adams, and you wouldn't really know it now. I hope there'll be a plaque someday before they bulldoze the joint.
That is so cool. The next question is for David. Now that the book is out, do you have any regrets about someone or something that's not included?
Oh my God. Yeah, sure. It's funny. I started jotting down people that I wish there was more about in it. And it's, a pretty, I'm not going to read it off, but it's a pretty lengthy list. I only had so many words, so many chapters. I wasn't interested in just doing a series of Wikipedia style entries. I wanted to try to tell a story. So I had to make a lot of difficult decisions. There's plenty of people that were overlooked, and believe you me, I've heard lots of lots about that. The great thing about North Carolina music is you could do just as compelling a book with a completely different cast of characters. I feel like that story, you could tell it with any number of artists. And as I mentioned, a more detailed Winston-Salem book would be a great thing. And also, every chapter in this could be its own full-length book. So yeah, plenty of regrets, but life is short.
All right, our next question says, I am a relatively recent mover to Winston-Salem. I lived in Chapel Hill for 10 years, 95 to 2005, and there was a sort of glue there between generations of music fans. For example, Bill Burton at WXYC trained the next generation. I wonder if the decline in music here in Winston-Salem would be due to the lack of this kind of conduit between ages.
I don't know about the word decline. I mean, it might, what the Ramcat's doing is making it rise, but
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, I'll say that one of the tough things in Winston-Salem for years was finding a gig, and having had Richard Emmett run the Garage for many years and Jay running Ziggy's and keeping things going for a while, I think that's important. And there've always been Winston-Salem bands. There've always, and there will continue to be. And I think that, yeah, it's true that people will train you, but I mean, as musicians, you really have to kind of make the band thing happen for yourself. There's not anything that anybody can tell you how. I'm discovering this now. I have a 13-year-old daughter that wants to play bass in a band, right? Come to the expert, right? Can't tell her what to do. I just say, well, keep practicing until you find somebody, and I think that as I said, Doug Davis, perfect example of Winston-Salem music right now. There's Caleb Cottle has doing great business, with his beautiful songs. There's a lot of really, really excellent music out there. There's people from our generation that are doing really great things. Can I do a shout out real quick? Okay, 2 shout outs. I'm going to make it 2. First, I want to say that Dale Cole has been doing this virtual village charity for a while, and it's raising funds for Hope of Winston-Salem to feed hungry children locally. And so that's a really important thing to know. Dale has done a great job with that. Also, our dear friends, Rob Slater, who was in Sneakers, and Ed Bumgardner, who has been in a million different bands and wrote for the Winston-Salem Journal for years. They have a charity called Be Good to Yourself that is providing mental health for North Carolina musicians who really need it. And if you want to get in touch with me at the end of this show, I can give you the addresses for both if you're feeling like you want to be generous and make a difference. Both of those charities are worth your while.
And
Thank you.
I'm doing a thing, you probably know Record Store Day if you're involved in music, and it's coming back live. And Mike Kurtz, who is very involved with that, is putting out a record of mine that I consider to be the best record I've ever made. Came out last year, called A Brand New Shade of Blue, but it's coming out on vinyl. All proceeds go to benefit the Shalom Project in Winston, which helps homeless men get back on track with their lives or get to a better place. And so the Shalom Project we're very proud to be helping that. Jeffrey Dean Foster is doing this as well. So Record Store Day, or any day, you could think about that one. I would also say, if you want to be in Winston and you want to be inspired, there are mentors out there given the internet. I mean, I would just look at the Ben Folds catalog. He's a very inspiring guy. I mean, his writing is impeccable and very deep, and I mean, harmonically and melodically. If I was in a bedroom trying to play guitar at the age 13, well, I would probably move to piano for Ben Folds. It's across the board. I think that is an inspiration to anybody who's in Winston.
Awesome. Thank you both. From Jeff McIntosh, we have a question. How important was it to have a cool record store in town? Ed and Chuck were a great source of what was happening.
I think that's a very important place to go. We had, prior to the record exchange, we had Resnick's and we had Juniors. What?
And who worked at Resnick's?
Oh, everybody. David Niblock worked at Resnick's. Sam Moss worked at Resnick's. I worked at Resnick's. Oh gosh, it's just. I mean, for me, it was the old guys. When I was a teenager, there was a listening booth, and they were the ones that said, "Why don't you listen to Lick My Decals Off, Baby? You're probably going to buy Sweet Baby James, but you might want to have this." So it's important to have the older guy thing happening, and that they were fond of us, and they treated us like human beings, not like stupid kids. So yes, it's very important to have a record store like that.
And then another question, with so much talent coming out of Winston-Salem over the years in rock, R&B, jazz, and other genres, why do Chris and Peter think the city government officials, arts council leaders, and tourism leaders have not used music more often to promote the city? It's a big question.
Well, I stopped beating my wife about I don't have any idea about how to answer that. I think music is of great value, and I hope that more is done, but you got me.
The wheels of government turn slowly. If it took the 5 Royales as long as it took to get a street named after them, that'll give you some idea. But I mean, I don't understand. The School of the Arts has been in Winston-Salem for decades. What a vast population of music to draw from. That's a very, very good question, and I also don't have a real answer for it, but I wish they did. I mean, I guess it's that question of trying to make a place a destination. I live in Durham now, and there's been a real concerted effort to drive people to the ballpark or to DPAC or American Tobacco Campus or something like that. And I don't know what it's like in Winston-Salem at this point. I haven't kept up. After my parents passed away, I only get down there periodically. So, but I would hope that they would have some sort of insight into that. It would be a really worthwhile thing to bring to people, to let them know about the music of Winston.
And I should say thank you to the organizations like Muse and the Ramcat that do make sure we know about the music of Winston-Salem. I learned a lot when I first moved here from the Ramcat, so I appreciate that. Another great question here. Much like the Chitlin Circuit, North Carolina and the Southeast colleges and college towns were helpful for distributing sounds and ideas for weirdos from the 70s to the 90s. Can any of the speakers discuss ideas and friendships or partnerships that came out of these places?
Can I field that real quick? One of the shows that came to Winston-Salem was the Hampton Grease Band. And that, if you're not familiar with the Hampton Grease Band, they had the all-time lowest selling debut album in Columbia Records history. That's a title they held for many years. You probably remember Colonel Bruce Hampton, who ended up being sort of a star of the jam band circuit. And you might know Glenn Phillips, their guitar player, but they blew people's minds. There you go. David's got the picture of the record up. Music to Eat, two record set, or it's just, if you haven't heard it, it's really indescribable. But that's a band that came to Winston-Salem and people saw that and it changed our outlook. When the MC5 came to Winston-Salem, I wasn't there for that either. That also changed people's outlooks. There was never a show quite like that. You know, that's all I gotta say.
I mean, I'm not sure that anything surpassed seeing Captain Speed and the Fungi Electric Mothers at Bishop McGinnis High School for me. This is a little off topic, but I mean, the MC5 was wonderful. And it seemed like every, you know, Ron Carter or B.B. King, I mean, there were amazing things coming through all the time. But for me, I must have been barely 13. And to see Mike Greer and Bud Carlisle up there, Steve Hutchinson playing this music that was like melted laser beams. I mean, I had no vocabulary to understand it. And I think my jaw dropped the entire time. And, you know, I don't know if we really said much about Captain Speed, but they were a huge inspiration to a lot of the Combo Corner people, partially just because Buddy could sing great, play great, and wrote these incredibly cool songs that were connected to what was going on in the psychedelic scene in San Francisco, perhaps, but he was doing it here, you know. That show, I can still put myself right there in my mind. So Captain Speed and the Fungi Electric Mothers, I think that their record is on YouTube if you want to hear it.
I can speak a little bit to Chapel Hill. Which is funny because I've never actually lived in Chapel Hill, but I've just spent a lot of time there. And the way those friendships kind of persist, there is a group of guys, I think it's primarily guys, who went to UNC during the 80s, and they are all out in Hollywood making films and TV shows. And, you know, these are pretty big times, you know, like Peyton Reed is probably the best known of that generation. And he directs the Ant-Man movies. He's directed movies that have collectively grossed over $1 billion. There was a fellow named Dave Burris who was a producer for Survivor. And Blades of Glory was another movie that came, the Will Ferrell comedy that came out of that crew. So yeah, this was a generation of students that came together from all over North Carolina, wound up in Chapel Hill, and then they seemed to move en masse out to Hollywood. And yeah, it's like there's a UNC campus out there in Hollywood. So that's a strange little side current that came out of all that.
Great. The next question is for Peter. Can you talk a little bit about Little Diesel?
Sure, it would be my pleasure. I know Bob Northcott is on the Zoom chat as well. Hi, Bob. You can't say anything to me, can you?
Hey, man.
Hey, man.
Hey, man.
There he
You
is.
look great.
Thank you.
Grow some hair.
Bob Northcott was another one of those mentors in Winston-Salem, even though we were the same age. But Bob's singular good taste in music and counterculture humor really influenced a bunch of us as well. And he and Will Rigby, who was the drummer for the DBs, started playing together with a sax player, Bruce Swaim, and called it Wazoo. And Wazoo was great. But then I was getting ready to get out of playing with Rittenhouse because Mitch and Chris really wanted to do stuff with taping, and I was just sort of wanted to play and was kind of gravitating more toward the Flamin' Groovy stuff. And so they very kindly let me join, and I played some piano and guitar, and we had the best time of any band in Winston-Salem, I think. We were playing songs that if we thought people didn't want to hear the songs that Rittenhouse was playing, they really didn't want to hear the songs that Little Diesel was playing. We were playing New York Dolls. It was just, it was a lot of stuff that was going.
Mr. Ray.
It was great. It was the best time ever, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very much so. It was great.
Except for Parenthood, of course. But we played for a couple of years and went in Chris's house, 5 of us and Chris Chamis and Chris Stamey with little tiny tweed Fender amps on his wall, and we recorded a whole album. And we put it out on a 8-track, a yellow covered 8-track. And then we all went off to college and sort of didn't do it again. And then somewhere along the line, Chris found the tapes at Mitch's, I guess, and said, you should take it to and have him put it out. And so Todd Aperson up in New York put it out on Telstar. And so there is a record called No Lie, and it is an extraordinary piece of work, I got to say. Nothing like it ever before or since.
Peter, I could play a little bit of Little Diesel.
Please do.
We'll play. So what I have is what you sent me, which is the Little Diesel that you guys played in 2018.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Kissy Boys?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me share screen again.
Ladies and gentlemen, Little Diesel. Kissy boy,
like I say, never before and never since.
And Kate, I'll pass it back to you. Just one or two more quick questions, and we'll probably wrap it up for the evening.
All right, I have a question for David here. They say a bit off topic perhaps, but you wrote about music for a daily newspaper. Local newspapers are dying slowly. What is the impact on the music itself?
Local newspapers are actually dying rapidly. It's, well, you know, it's hard to say. It's been so many years since newspapers really had an impact on that kind of thing, that I'm not sure there's much of an impact now as opposed to a year ago, say. You know, it used to be another focal point, like the record store or the cool nightclub, you know, a gathering spot of sorts when people were reading the local rock columnist. It maybe gave a sense of cohesiveness, you know, set the tone, set the agenda, and that's kind of missing. Things have just gotten so diffuse now, it's kind of hard to imagine anything or anyone filling that role again, which has its good points and bad points. I mean, you know, there's probably an argument to be made that some dude at the paper doesn't necessarily need to be setting so much of the agenda, but yeah, I certainly miss it. I don't know if anybody else does, but I do.
I mean, there's been a move away from curation in general. I mean, this happened in record companies when you had, all of a sudden, Clive Davis is running Columbia and he's been the accountant. He's not a musician, but before that, there were gatekeepers. And that meant that everybody who made a record kind of satisfied maybe good standards. The guys at Atlantic were really pretty savvy, or maybe kind of crappy standards. And nowadays that pre-filter is gone, and that may let great things through. And that may also keep some great things hidden. I guess if you knew what Robert Christgau, say at the Village Voice, liked, then you could decide if what he was touting was probably something you would like or not. And now it's, you know, you don't have that valet parking anymore. So what I actually miss is working for record companies. I miss the great A&R guy. They were a different kind of gatekeeper. There were a lot of bad ones, but when you were making a record with a great band and you had some skills, and then there was a great A&R guy, it was really a fantastic combination. And A&R seems to be, in the work I'm getting, the A&R is not really a part of it anymore. I mean, Omnivore accepted, and Propeller. All quiet on the Western Front.
Well, we are out of audience questions for the night, but I have to say it was just a privilege to hear the three of you speak about this music scene and what it means to you and what it means to all of us too. So, so thank you so much for answering your questions and bringing your experiences to us.
Kate, I want
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Kate, I want to before we finish tonight, I want to thank you, Kate, for moderating this event so beautifully, and on behalf of Muse Winston-Salem and the Ramcat as well. I just want to again thank Peter Holsapple, David Menconi, Chris Stamey, and awesome cameo by Mitch Easter. I want to just say two things quickly before we go. One, though it's of secondary importance, if you've enjoyed tonight's event and want to support Muse Winston-Salem and its ongoing efforts to create programs like this, and this has been absolutely spectacular. I've really found this conversation both informative and in its own way actually quite moving. So I thank you personally for that. But if you want to support Muse Winston-Salem and its efforts to keep programs like this going, I believe Alana is always ready to drop a link in the chat bar that will take you quickly to a place where you can make a donation to Muse. And when you're there, you can also sign up to be on our listserv, so we can get you information about programs coming down the road. Speaking of which, let me just share do one last screen share for the evening. This is a very early. We're not in the business usually of having our flyers created 6-7 months ahead of time, but here we go. November 4th, 2021, speculating wildly on the ability to gather in mass in places like the Ramcat in town. We have booked Mitch Easter for a 40th anniversary event. It was 40 years ago at the Cat's Cradle, I believe, and that Let's Active played its first live concert in November of 1981 in my hometown of Chapel Hill, Carrboro, North Carolina. And that seems like an apropos time to celebrate that 40th anniversary. So Ramcat and Muse are partnering again for an event. This flyer is coming out way ahead of our actual conversation about the exact details of that event, but put it on your calendar right now, and we'll love to see you then. I think with that, unless anybody else needs the last word, I'll just again thank all of our participants tonight for giving us this great evening of reflection, and thank you all for all the audience members for joining us. And unless Alana needs to say something that I've forgotten to say, we're good to go.
I'd like to remind everybody, this is out in a week, live at the Ramcat. And,
yeah.
It's actually good, quite good, excellent.
It's really good.
Yeah, and thank you, Chris, for saying that. Please go to Muse Winston-Salem's Facebook page. There's already the links up if you scroll down, but we'll post a fresh list of links to both pre-order Chris's album that's about to come out, get a discount through bookmarks to buy David's book. And anything else that folks want to tell us you need to buy, we'll have it up there too. So thanks everybody. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
This was great.